The chamber stretched vast and cold, built by architects who wanted visitors to feel small. Ambassador Gina stood at the speaking platform, her hands steady despite the weight of 100 alien eyes watching her. Above, the council members sat on elevated thrones arranged in a perfect circle. Each throne represented a species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years. Each species looked down at humanity with barely hidden contempt. Gina cleared her throat and began her proposal. Her voice carried across the chamber, calm and professional. She requested expansion rights for human colonies, access to 3 uninhabited star systems that surveys had shown were rich in resources. It was a modest request. Humanity needed room to grow. Their current territories were overcrowded, stretched thin across a handful of worlds the Council had deemed acceptable. The Valkyrie Patriarch was the first to laugh. It started as a low rumble from his massive frame, then grew louder. Others joined in. The Drenthi representative clicked his mandibles in what passed for their version of mockery. The laughter echoed through the chamber for a full minute before the Patriarch raised one clawed hand for silence. "Humans," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you have been part of this council for barely 50 years. A blink of an eye. And yet you come here demanding more? Your species is violent, unstable, driven by emotions you cannot control. We allow you to exist among civilized races out of charity, nothing more." Gina felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this speech dozens of times. With respect, Patriarch, humanity has contributed significantly to interstellar trade. Our technology has improved medical care across 7 systems. Our diplomats have negotiated peaceful resolutions to conflicts that had lasted centuries. We ask only for the opportunity to grow as any species would. The Drenthi representative leaned forward, his metallic voice harsh through the translator. "Your contributions are noted and dismissed. You are primitives who stumbled onto faster-than-light travel through luck, nothing more. The systems you request are restricted for a reason. We cannot trust your kind with unrestricted expansion." Around the chamber, other representatives nodded in agreement. The decision had been made before Gina had even spoken. She had known it would be, but protocol demanded she try. She bowed slightly, the gesture stiff with suppressed frustration, and left the platform. As she walked through the corridors toward the human embassy section, her communicator buzzed. Admiral Hyun's face appeared on the small screen, his weathered features set in a grim expression. He had been watching the session from Earth. "Another rejection," he said. "It was not a question. They barely pretended to consider it," Gina replied quietly, aware that Council security monitored all communications in this building. "The same accusations? Too violent, too emotional, too primitive." Hyun nodded slowly. "Then we continue with the alternative preparations. How much longer do you think we have before they make their move?" "I don't know." But the contempt is growing bolder. "They used to at least pretend to respect us." Gina glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice further. "The latest intelligence suggests they're discussing containment measures. Some council members think humanity should be restricted even further." "Let them think we're contained," Hyun said softly. "Let them think we're harmless." The communication ended. Gina continued to her office, where reports from across human space waited for her attention. On the surface, everything looked normal. Humanity continued its trade routes, maintained diplomatic relations, sent its children to council universities. But beneath that surface, something else was growing, far from council space. In orbital facilities that did not appear on any official registry, humanity was building. Admiral Hyun oversaw much of it from Earth's military command center. The room was always busy, officers moving between stations, holographic displays showing ship movements across dozens of systems. Captain Minho stood beside one such display, studying fleet formations. He was young for his rank, only 32. But his tactical mind had earned him a position on the indomitable humanity's flagship. The ship was impressive by Council standards. What the Council did not know was that the Indomitable was simply the visible part of Earth's fleet. The real strength lay hidden, Status on the Ghost Fleet? Hyan asked, approaching Minho's station. All 300 vessels are operational, sir. Stealth systems performing above expectations. Council sensors can't detect them even at close range. Minho pulled up another display showing sleek ships that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. The Eclipse is ready for her test run. Hyan allowed himself a small smile. The Eclipse was Minho's ship, a prototype that combined stealth technology with weapon systems no Council race had ever encountered. And Hannah's project? She says the Singularity devices are stable, ready for deployment on your order. In another facility, one built inside a hollowed asteroid far from any trade route, Hannah ran final checks on her life's work. The devices looked small, almost harmless. Cylinders no larger than a person, covered in cooling systems and complex mathematical equations etched into their surfaces. But each one could destabilize a star, create a controlled black hole, or erase a space station from existence. She hated them. Hated what they represented, what they could do. But she understood why they were necessary. The Council respected only strength, only power. Humanity had tried diplomacy, tried trade, tried proving themselves worthy through peaceful means. They had been dismissed at every turn. Hannah's assistant, a young woman named Sora, approached with a datapad. The final test was successful. All safety protocols responded as designed. We can control the reaction, limit the destruction to precise targets. That doesn't make it right, Hannah said quietly. No, Sora agreed. But it makes it necessary. Back on Earth, in facilities spread across 3 continents, other preparations continued. Major Nari drilled her Reaper teams in zero-gravity combat. These were not regular soldiers. They were experts in shipboarding and fighting in the tight corridors of spacecraft where one wrong shot could breach a hull. They trained for scenarios the Council had never considered because no race had ever been insane enough to try them. Taiho worked in a different kind of facility. One filled with quantum computers and neural interface systems. His team specialized in cyber warfare, in breaking into alien systems and taking control. They had spent years studying Council technology, finding weaknesses, creating backdoors. When the time came, they would turn the Council's own ships against them. Dr. Sung sat in his laboratory, looking at simulations of what his weapons would do. Stars collapsing, systems dying, entire populations at risk. He had told Heian repeatedly that these weapons should never be used. Hyan had agreed, but insisted they be ready nonetheless. We won't fire first, Hyan had promised. But if they push us too far, if they threaten our people, then we must be ready to respond with overwhelming force. Not to conquer, but to ensure we're never victims again. As Ambassador Gina prepared for another feudal council session the next morning, as Admiral Hyan reviewed fleet deployments, as Hannah checked her terrible devices one more time, none of them knew how soon those preparations would matter. None of them knew that in a distant system, a human colony called New Sol was about to become the spark that would ignite everything. The Council continued their meetings, comfortable in their superiority, blind to the storm gathering just beyond their sight. They had dismissed humanity as primitive and emotional. They had treated humans as second-class citizens for 50 years. They had drawn a line and told humanity not to cross it. Soon, the Council would learn what happens when you push humans too far. Soon, they would discover that the primitive species they had mocked had been preparing for this moment all along. Soon, the galaxy would change forever, but for now, there was only waiting, and the cold certainty that peace could not last. The colony of New Sol had existed for 8 years, built by families who wanted a fresh start among the stars. The planet was beautiful, with purple-tinted skies and vast oceans that sparkled under a yellow sun. More importantly, it sat in a system rich with rare minerals needed for advanced technology. The colonists had filed all the proper papers, received all the correct permits. Everything was legal according to the documents. Earth had been given. Governor Kiwan walked through the central dome on what seemed like an ordinary morning. Children ran to school, their laughter echoing off the transparent walls. Farmers checked their hydroponic gardens. Engineers monitored the atmospheric processors that made the air breathable. 200,000 people had made this place home. They had built something worth protecting. His communicator buzzed with an urgent message from the orbital station. Governor, we have multiple ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They're not responding to hails. Transponders identify them as Council military vessels. Kiwan felt his stomach drop. How many? 30 warships? Volkari and Drenthi signatures? Sir, they're moving toward us at attack speed. Within minutes, alarms blared across the colony. People looked up in confusion, then fear as they heard the evacuation orders. Kiwan ran to the command center, his mind racing through possibilities. This had to be a misunderstanding. New Sol was a legal colony? They had broken no laws. The communication system crackled to life with a voice he recognized. The Valkyrie patriarch himself. Attention, human colonists. You have established an illegal settlement in restricted space. You were warned that expansion outside designated zones would not be tolerated. You have 30 minutes to begin evacuation procedures. After that time, we will enforce council law. This is Governor Kiwan, he transmitted back, forcing his voice to remain calm. There must be a mistake. New Sol is registered with all proper council authorities. Our permits were approved 3 years ago. We have families here, children. Please give us time to resolve this peacefully. There is nothing to resolve. You are in violation. 30 minutes. Kiwan immediately contacted Earth. Patching through to both Admiral Hyan and Ambassador Gina, they appeared on his screen, their faces showing controlled fury. We're checking the records now, Gina said quickly. The Council changed the designation of that system 6 months ago. They never informed us. They're claiming you knowingly violated their new restrictions. That's insane, Kiwan said. We can't evacuate 200,000 people in 30 minutes. We'd need weeks, maybe months. Admiral Hyan leaned forward. Start loading transports immediately. Prioritize children and medical patients. I'm sending every ship we have in nearby systems, but they won't arrive in time. In the medical center, Yuna rushed through corridors helping patients onto stretchers. She was a trauma specialist, trained for emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for this. Children cried for their parents. Elderly patients who could not be moved safely lay in their beds, eyes wide with fear. The transport ships could only hold a fraction of the colony's population. She helped a young boy onto a transport, his hand clutching a stuffed animal. Is my mom coming? He asked. She'd be on the next ship, Yuna promised, hoping it was true. The boy's mother was in surgery. There was no next ship. 20-9 minutes passed. The transports lifted off, overloaded with people. Some ships had passengers standing in cargo holds, packed so tightly they could barely breathe. Governor Kiwan refused to leave, staying in the command center with a skeleton crew of volunteers who were determined to save as many as possible. We need more time, Kiwan transmitted to the Council fleet. Please, we're evacuating as fast as we can. These are civilians, families. Give us 1 hour, just 1 more hour. The Valkyrie Patriarch responded with cold finality. Your time is expired. The first strikes hit the orbital station. It disappeared in a ball of fire, taking 300 people with it. Then the bombardment began. Missiles rained down on the colony domes. The shields held for exactly 40 seconds before overloading. Kiwan grabbed the communication console, his hands shaking. This is New Sol. We are under attack. The Council is firing on civilians. They're killing everyone. Please, if anyone can hear this, the central dome exploded. The transmission cut to static dot from the medical center. Yuna activated her purter as the ceiling began to crack. She had to document this, had to make sure someone knew what happened here. Through the transparent walls, she could see explosions blooming across the colony like terrible flowers. The school. The residential sectors. The hydroponics facilities. She pointed her recorder at a window where children were being led to a basement shelter, their teachers trying to keep them calm even as death rained from the sky. They're targeting everything, she said into the device, her voice breaking. They're not just destroying military targets. They're killing everyone. The wall behind her shattered. The recorder clattered to the floor, still transmitting for another 30 seconds before the signal died. In orbit, the few transport ships that had escaped watched in horror as the colony died beneath them. Some captains wanted to go back to save more people, but their ships were already damaged from debris. They could only watch and record, bearing witness to the massacre. The bombardment lasted 2 hours. The Council fleet was thorough. Every dome was destroyed. Every shelter was targeted. The agricultural zones burned. The water processing plants were reduced to slag. When it was over, New Sol was nothing but craters and debris. A warning written in fire and death. 16,000 colonists had escaped in the transports. 184,000 had not. The Council broadcast their official statement within the hour. The Drenthi representative delivered it with no trace of emotion. A human colony in violation of Council law has been removed. This action was necessary to maintain order and respect for established boundaries. Let this serve as a reminder that all species must obey Council regulations. Further violations will be met with similar responses. On Earth, in the Military Command Center, Admiral Hyon watched the recordings from the survivors. His face was carved from stone, showing nothing, but his hands gripped the edge of his desk hard enough to leave marks. Officers around him stood silent, watching the footage of children running from explosions, of hospitals being destroyed, of an entire community being erased. Ambassador Gina sat in her office at Council headquarters, staring at the same recordings. She had spent years arguing for peace, for diplomacy, for understanding between species. She had believed that given time, the Council would accept humanity as equals. That belief died as she watched Yuna's final transmission. As she heard Governor Kiwan's last desperate plea for mercy, she stood and began composing a message. It was simple, direct, and final. She sent it to every council member, to every embassy, to every diplomatic channel she had access to. Effective immediately, all human diplomatic personnel are withdrawing from council space. All trade agreements are suspended. All cultural exchanges are terminated. You wanted to see humanity's warlike nature. You called us violent and emotional. You were right. We are capable of great violence when you threaten our families. We tried peace. We tried diplomacy. We tried to prove we deserved a place among the stars. You answered with the murder of innocents. Now you will see what happens when humanity stops trying to be civilized. Now you will face what you have created. Across human space, the message was received with grief that quickly turned to cold fury. People gathered in streets and squares, watching the footage from New Sol on public screens. They saw their children dying, their families burning, their future being destroyed by species that considered themselves superior. Admiral Hyon stood before Earth's unified government and requested full authorization for military action. There was no debate. The vote was unanimous. He was given complete operational authority, unlimited resources, and a single directive: make the Council understand that humanity would never be victims again. In her laboratory, Hannah received the order to arm all singularity devices. She thought of the boy she had seen in Yuna's recording, the one clutching his stuffed animal. She thought of the teachers trying to protect their students even as the walls collapsed around them. Her hands were steady as she entered the activation codes. Major Nari assembled her Reaper teams. Taiho activated his cyber warfare networks. Dr. Sung uploaded targeting data for his weapons, his face pale but determined. Captain Minho climbed into the cockpit of the Eclipse, ready to show the Council what human engineering could really do. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson, written in blood and fire. The Galactic Council had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. They had killed human children and expected humanity to accept it, to bow and be grateful for being allowed to exist. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. 20-4 hours after New Sol died, every human military installation went to full alert. Bases that had operated in peacetime mode for decades suddenly transformed into war machines. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels switched to warship production. Training facilities that had focused on defensive tactics began drilling for assault operations. Admiral Hayon stood in the command center on Earth, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet movements across human space. His senior officers gathered around him, waiting for orders. These were men and women who had spent years preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Now it was here? Status report, Hayon said quietly. Captain Minho stepped forward. The Ghost Fleet is fully operational. All 300 stealth vessels are in position at designated coordinates. Council sensors show no indication they're aware of our presence. The Eclipse is ready for the opening strike. Cyber warfare capabilities? Hayon asked. Tejo pulled up a different display. We have backdoors into every major Council communication network. Their military encryption codes were broken 6 months ago. When you give the order, we can seize control of their command and control systems. Flood their networks with whatever data we choose. Singularity devices? Hannah appeared via holographic link from her laboratory. She looked tired, her eyes red from lack of sleep. All devices are armed and positioned. We have coverage on 12 Council shipyards, 15 military installations, and their primary fortress at Guardian's Gate. Sir, I need to stress again that these weapons are incredibly destructive. Once deployed, there's no pulling them back. Noted, Hayon said. He turned to Major Nari. Reaper teams? Nari stood at attention, her expression fierce. 200 teams ready for deployment. We've identified high-value targets across the Council fleet. We can board and capture or destroy any vessel you designate. Hayon nodded slowly, studying the displays. The Council thought humanity was weak, emotional, disorganized. They were about to learn the truth. Humans could be emotional, yes, but they could also be coldly efficient when protecting their own. Here's how this will work, Hayon said, his voice carrying to every officer in the room. We don't want to conquer the Council. We want to break their ability to threaten us ever again. We want them to understand, deep in their bones, that attacking humans comes with a price they cannot afford to pay. He pulled up a tactical display of Council space. Phase 1. We eliminate their shipyards and military infrastructure. Make it impossible for them to rebuild quickly. Phase 2. We engage their fleets, demonstrate technological superiority. Phase 3. We force their surrender and dictate new terms for galactic civilization. Rules of engagement? Minho asked. We target military assets only. No civilian populations, no colony worlds. We're not murderers like they are. But their soldiers, their warships, their military installations, all legitimate targets. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop until they surrender. Across human space, ships began moving into position. The Ghost Fleet, invisible to Council sensors, drifted like silent predators through the void. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering, combining stealth technology with weapon systems developed specifically to counter Council defenses. Captain Minho sat in the cockpit of the Eclipse, running final checks. His crew was small, only 15 people, but each one was an expert in their field. The ship itself was beautiful in a deadly way, all smooth curves and dark surfaces that seemed to absorb light. All systems green, his tactical officer reported. Stealth generators at maximum efficiency. We could fly through a Council patrol and they'd never know we were there. Let's hope we don't have to test that theory, Minho said. Navigation? Plot a course to the Velkari shipyards at Throne's Edge. Time to send a message. In her laboratory, Hannah watched as her devices were loaded onto automated drones. Each one would position itself near a target and wait for activation. She had designed them to be controllable, to limit collateral damage. But she knew what they could do. Each singularity device could create a small, temporary black hole that would consume everything within a specific radius, then collapse safely. Dr. Soong approached her workspace, his face troubled. You know, these weapons violate at least 30 interstellar treaties, right? The Council violated every treaty on warfare when they murdered civilians at New Seoul, Hannah replied quietly. Besides, treaties only matter if both sides follow them. They stopped following the rules. We're just adapting to the new reality. That's what worries me. What happens after? Do we become what we're fighting against? Hannah was silent for a moment, then shook her head. No, because we're using these weapons to end a war, not to conquer. Once the Council surrenders, I'm decommissioning every device. They'll never be used again. I'll make sure of it. Meanwhile, Taiho and his cyber warfare team were preparing their assault on Council networks. They sat in a facility deep underground, surrounded by quantum computers that hummed with processing power. Screens showed code streaming past, backdoors being verified, attack vectors being optimized. We need to control their narrative, Taiho explained to his team. Right now, the Council is telling their citizens that New Sol was a justified enforcement action. We're going to flood every Council communication network with the truth. Every citizen on every Council world will see what their governments did. They'll watch those children dying. They'll hear Governor Kiwan's final words. We're going to make it impossible for them to hide what they are. One of his technicians looked up. Some of those citizens might not want to know, might not care. Then that's on them, Taiho said coldly. But they'll know. No one gets to claim ignorance after this. Major Nari stood before her assembled Reaper teams in a training facility that had been converted to a briefing center. 200 of humanity's best special forces operators listened as she outlined their missions. Each team had a specific target, a specific objective. The Council thinks space combat is about big ships firing at each other from a distance, Nari said. They've forgotten that wars are won by soldiers willing to get their hands dirty. We're going to board their flagships, capture their command staff, turn their own vessels against them. They'll learn that in close quarters, no one fights like humans. A young Reaper named June raised his hand. Rules on prisoners? Standard rules of war apply. If they surrender, we take them prisoner and treat them humanely. We're not savages. But anyone who keeps fighting, anyone who threatens our teams, neutralize them. Back in the command center, Admiral Hyan received a communication from Ambassador Gina. She was still at Council headquarters, preparing to leave with the last of the human diplomatic staff. The Council is in chaos, she reported. They can't believe we're actually doing this. The Valkyrie Patriarch is calling emergency sessions, demanding we stand down. The Drenthi are mobilizing their fleets. Some of the smaller Council members are trying to stay neutral. Let them try, Hyan said. Anyone who participated in the attack on New Sol is a legitimate target. Anyone who stands aside will be left alone. This isn't about conquest or revenge. This is about teaching a lesson. What about after? Gina asked quietly. What kind of galaxy do we want when this is over? A better one? One where no species can casually murder another's children and expect no consequences. One where strength doesn't mean the right to oppress. We're not going to rule the galaxy, Gina. We're going to make it so no one can. Gina nodded. Then I'll see you when it's over. And Admiral? Make them pay for New Sol. Count on it. Across human space, families gathered to watch the news broadcasts. They saw military preparations, saw interviews with survivors from New Sol, saw the footage that had been seared into humanity's collective memory. There was no celebration, no joy in the coming war. Just a cold determination that this would never happen again. Children drew pictures of the New Sol colony, leaving them at memorials. Artists created installations showing the faces of those who had died. Musicians composed songs of loss and anger. Humanity was mourning, but it was also preparing to ensure that no other colony would ever burn like New Sol had. Admiral Hyan looked at the chronometer on his display. In 6 hours, the first singularity devices would activate. In 8 hours, the Ghost Fleet would engage Council forces. In 12 hours, the galaxy would know that humanity was no longer asking for a place among the stars. They were taking it, and anyone who stood in their way would learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. He thought about the footage from New Sol, about Governor Kiwan's last transmission, about Yuna's recording showing children being led to shelters that would become their tombs. He thought about the 184,000 people who had died simply because they wanted to build new lives on a distant world. The council had made a calculation. They had decided that humanity could be bullied, threatened, contained. They had been wrong. Now they would pay the price for that mistake. Hyan opened a channel to all human military forces. "This is Admiral Hyan. In a few hours we go to war. Remember why we're fighting? Remember New Soul? Remember that we didn't start this, but we're going to finish it. Stay disciplined, follow your training, and show the galaxy what humanity is really capable of. Let's bring our people home." The response came from 300 ships, from underground facilities, from bases across human space. One word spoken by thousands of voices in unison: "I." The storm was about to break. The war began in silence. 12 council shipyards were operating at full capacity, building the vessels that would enforce their dominance across the galaxy. Workers moved between construction berths, welding and assembling the massive warships that kept lesser species in line. None of them noticed the small objects drifting in the void nearby, objects that appeared on no sensors, that reflected no light. At exactly midnight Earth time, Hana activated the first singularity devices. There was no warning, no alarm. Space simply folded in on itself at 12 locations simultaneously. The shipyards didn't explode. They didn't burn. They simply ceased to exist, drawn into points of infinite density for 3 seconds before the controlled singularities collapsed safely. 12 shipyards, each capable of producing 20 warships per year, gone. 240 potential warships that would never be built. The Council's ability to replace losses had just been cut by a third, and they didn't even know it yet. News of the shipyard disappearances reached the Vakari Patriarch within an hour. He stared at the reports, his massive hands trembling with rage and confusion. Entire facilities had vanished without a trace. No debris, no survivors, nothing. His military advisors had no explanation. "It must be the humans," he said finally. "They're the only ones with a motive." "Impossible," his chief military commander replied. "We have their fleet positions monitored. None of their ships were anywhere near those locations. And they don't have technology capable of this kind of destruction. Then explain to me what happened." The commander had no answer. While the council struggled to understand what had occurred, Captain Minho guided the Eclipse toward its target. The Drenthi home fleet sat in orbit around their capital world. 50 warships arranged in a defensive formation that had protected them for centuries. They were magnificent vessels, built for intimidation as much as combat. Covered in weapons and armor plating, the Eclipse drifted past the outer picket ships, invisible to their sensors. Minho's crew worked in silence, each person focused on their task. They positioned themselves at the heart of the fleet, surrounded by enemy vessels that had no idea they were there. "Targeting solutions locked," the weapons officer whispered, though there was no need to whisper in the void. "All 50 ships in range? Taiho, you ready?" Minho asked from Earth. Taiho's voice came through the secure channel. "Standing by. On your mark, I'll flood their networks and kill their sensor grids." "Mark!" The Drenthi fleet suddenly went blind. Their sensors showed nothing but static. Their communication systems started broadcasting footage from New Sol on every channel. Admiral and crew members stared at their screens, seeing human children dying, hearing Governor Kiwan's desperate pleas for mercy. Before they could react, the Eclipse opened fire. The ship's main weapon wasn't a traditional cannon. It fired compressed gravity pulses that crushed armor like paper. The first 3 Drenthi warships crumpled inward, their hulls folding like crushed cans. Escape pods launched automatically, but the ships themselves were total losses. The rest of the Ghost Fleet emerged from stealth, materializing like demons from nightmare. 300 human warships appeared in the middle of the Drenthi formation. The fight that followed lasted less than an hour. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Human ships moved with impossible precision, coordinating their attacks through quantum-linked computers. They deployed weapon systems the Council had never encountered. Swarm missiles that could change direction mid-flight, evading point defenses. energy weapons that ignored shields by phasing through them, gravity mines that locked ships in place, making them easy targets. The Drenthi fought back with desperate courage, but they were using tactics and weapons that were centuries old. Within 30 minutes, they had lost 30 ships. The remaining 20 attempted to retreat, but found their faster-than-light drives disabled by human cyber warfare. Admiral Hyan's voice broadcast across all frequencies. Attention, Drenthi fleet. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resist and we will destroy you. Surrender and you will be treated according to the laws of war. You have 60 seconds to decide. The Drenthi fleet marshal made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered his remaining ships to stand down. While the Drenthi were being defeated, the main human fleet was engaging the Valkyrie at their capital system. This was the heart of Council power, the throne world that had ruled the galaxy for 5,000 years. The Valkyrie had assembled their largest fleet. 200 warships commanded by their best admirals. They expected the humans to approach carefully, to probe their defenses, to engage in the kind of methodical warfare the Council practiced. Instead, the Indomitable dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly above the Valkyrie flagship. So close that the two ships nearly collided, the Valkyrie crew barely had time to react before boarding pods slammed into their hull. Major Nari and her Reaper teams breached the ship at 8 different locations simultaneously. The Valkyrie Marines who tried to stop them learned why humans had earned a reputation for viciousness in close combat. Reaper teams moved through the corridors with brutal efficiency. They used weapons designed for shipboard fighting, fletchette guns that shredded armor, plasma cutters that could slice through bulkheads, neural disruptors that incapacitated without causing hull breaches. The Valkyrie Marines were bigger, stronger, but the humans were faster, more adaptable, and far more willing to fight dirty. Nari led her team toward the bridge, where the Valkyrie admiral was attempting to coordinate his fleet's defense. They moved through clouds of smoke and the screaming of alarms, past Valkyrie Marines who either surrendered or died. At the bridge doors, Nari planted shape charges and blew them inward. The Valkyrie admiral stared at the humans who rushed through the smoke, these small creatures who had just seized control of his flagship. Nari pointed her weapon at him. Order your fleet to stand down. Never, we are Valkyrie. We do not surrender to primitives. Then watch your fleet die. Nari gestured to the view screens that showed the battle outside. The Valkyrie were losing. Human ships darted between their formations, taking out vessel after vessel with frightening precision. Already, 60 Valkyrie warships were destroyed or disabled. You're fighting a war that was already lost, Nari said. Your shipyards are gone. Your ability to replace losses has been destroyed. Every minute you keep fighting, more of your people die. For what? Pride? The admiral's face showed the agony of his decision. His species had ruled the galaxy for millennia. To surrender to humans, to creatures they had dismissed as primitive savages, was unthinkable. But he could see the battlefields. He could count his losses. If I surrender, he said slowly, you will treat my crew with honor? You have my word. We're not here to conquer or enslave. We're here to make you understand that you can't attack us without consequences. The admiral reached for his communication console with shaking hands. All Valkyrie vessels, this is Fleet Admiral Torvex. Cease fire. Power down weapons. We surrender. Across the battlefield, Valkyrie ships went dark one by one. The shooting stopped. Human ships moved in to secure the disabled vessels, to take prisoners, to provide medical aid to the wounded. They treated the defeated Valkyrie with professional courtesy, not cruelty. On Earth, Admiral Hyan watched the surrender with grim satisfaction. The Valkyrie had lost 60% of their fleet. The Drenthi were defeated. The other council races were in disarray, their military leaders unsure whether to fight or negotiate, but the war wasn't over. The Council had one last fortress, one final symbol of their power. Guardian's Gate was a massive space station built at the edge of Council space, designed to be impregnable. It was surrounded by defensive platforms, protected by shields that could withstand a supernova, armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The Council's remaining forces were gathering there for a final stand. Taiho's intelligence suggested they had assembled nearly 100 warships, plus the station's own formidable defenses. It would be the bloodiest battle of the war. Admiral Hyun stood in the command center, studying tactical displays of Guardian's Gate. His officers waited for orders. They had won every engagement so far, but this would be different. The Council was cornered now, desperate. They would fight with everything they had. "Sir," Minho said quietly, "we could bypass Guardian's Gate, head straight for Council member worlds, force individual surrenders." "No," Hyun said. "They need to see that we can break their strongest fortress. They need to understand that there's nowhere they can hide from us." He paused, then continued, "But we're not going to assault it." Hannah appeared on the communication screen. "Admiral? How many singularity devices do we have left?" 15. "More than enough for what you're thinking. Position them around Guardian's Gate. Make sure our deployment is obvious. I want them to know exactly what we're capable of doing." Dr. Soong's face appeared on another screen. "Admiral, if you activate singularities that close to a star, the reaction could be unstable. You could destroy the entire system." "I know. That's the point." Hyun opened a channel to Guardian's Gate. "This is Admiral Hyun of the Earth Defense Fleet. We have positioned 15 singularity devices around your system star. You have seen what one of these devices can do. 15 will destabilize the star, cause it to collapse. Everyone in this system will have approximately 6 hours to evacuate before the star goes supernova. You have 1 hour to surrender. After that, we activate the devices and leave. Your choice." The response came from the Valkyrie Patriarch himself. His image appeared on screen and he looked old suddenly, defeated. "You would murder billions just to win a war?" "No," Hyun said coldly. "You would force me to kill billions by refusing to surrender. We didn't start this war?" "You did. You murdered our children at New Seoul and expected us to accept it. Now you're learning what happens when you push humans too far. Surrender or watch your fortress and everyone in it die." 1 hour, the channel closed. In the command center, officers stood in silence. They all knew what was at stake. If the Council refused to surrender, if they called humanity's bluff, then Hyun would have to make an impossible decision, but it wasn't a bluff. The singularity devices were armed and ready. Hyun would destroy the system if he had to. Not out of cruelty, but to prove that humanity's warnings were never empty. 50-8 minutes later, Guardian's Gate transmitted its surrender. The war lasted 6 weeks. In that time, the Galactic Council learned what humanity was truly capable of when their families were threatened. They learned that the species they had dismissed as primitive had been preparing for war while pretending to seek peace. They learned that emotional and violent did not mean weak or stupid. Now, Admiral Hyun stood aboard what remained of the Valkyrie flagship, in a conference room that had once been a symbol of council. Power. Around him sat the military commanders and political leaders who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They looked diminished now, their pride broken, their certainty shattered. The Valkyrie Patriarch spoke first, his voice heavy with defeat. "What are your terms?" Hyun laid out a datapad on the table. "The Galactic Council as it existed is finished. It will be dissolved immediately. In its place, we establish the Galactic Commonwealth with equal representation for all species. No more elder races. No more restrictions on expansion based on how long a species has been in space." "That's chaos," the Drenthi representative protested weakly. "The younger species need guidance, structure. They need freedom," Hyun corrected. The Council's guidance was just another word for oppression. Every species gets equal say in Commonwealth decisions. One world, one vote. Ambassador Gina, who had been silent until now, stood and walked to the viewport. She looked out at the human fleet surrounding Guardian's Gate. All restricted zones are abolished. Humanity will receive full settlement rights to any system not already inhabited. The ban on accessing certain technologies is lifted. You don't get to decide anymore what other species are ready for. The Valkyrie Patriarch's hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. What could he say? His fleet was destroyed. His shipyards were gone. His species had been defeated by the primitives they had mocked. War reparations, Hyan continued. Every council member who participated in the attack on New Sol will contribute to rebuilding. Not just the colony, but compensation for every family that lost someone there. That could bankrupt our economies, a minor council member said. Then you should have thought about that before murdering civilians. Minho said coldly from his position by the door. Consider it a down payment on making sure you never do it again. Hyan pulled up another document. The New Sol system will become a memorial world. No colonization, no mining, no exploitation. Just a monument to the 184,000 people who died there. Every species in the Commonwealth will contribute to its maintenance. Future generations need to remember what happens when one species thinks it has the right to exterminate another. Major Nari stepped forward. We're establishing the Commonwealth Defense Force, personnel drawn from all member species, trained in combined tactics. No single species will have the power to dominate militarily again. We fight together or not at all. The council leaders exchanged glances. They were being offered terms that would fundamentally reshape galactic civilization. Everything they had built over millennia was being torn down and rebuilt according to human principles. And if we refuse these terms? The Valkyrie Patriarch asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then the war continues, Hyan said simply. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. But either way, the old council is finished. Choose. One by one, the council representatives accepted the terms. They signed documents that ended their dominance and created something new. Some did it with resignation, others with barely concealed anger. But they all signed. The transformation began immediately. Guardian's Gate became the headquarters of the new Commonwealth. Human engineers worked alongside Valkyrie technicians in Drenthi, programmers to convert the fortress into a center for cooperation rather than domination. The symbols of the old council were removed, replaced by a simple emblem showing multiple species. Hands clasped together, Admiral Hyan was offered the position of Supreme, Commander of the Commonwealth Defense Force. He accepted, but made it clear he would serve only until the transition was complete. This isn't about humans ruling, he said in his acceptance speech. This is about creating a system where no one rules through fear. Ambassador Gina became the first Secretary General of the Commonwealth Council. Her years of fighting diplomatic battles prepared her perfectly for the challenge of building consensus among dozens of species with different cultures and priorities. She approached the role with the same determination she had shown in the old council. But now she had the authority to make real changes. Captain Minho received a promotion to Admiral and command of a new flagship, the Eclipse II, but this ship wasn't crewed solely by humans. Valkyrie navigation specialists worked alongside human engineers. Drenthi tactical officers learned from human marines. The crew was a model for what the Commonwealth could become. In her laboratory, Hannah spent 3 weeks methodically dismantling every singularity device. She documented the process carefully, creating records that would allow the weapons to be rebuilt if absolutely necessary, but made it clear in her notes that they should never be used again. We created these out of desperation, she wrote. Let them remain a reminder of how close we came to becoming what we fought against. Dr. Soong left military service and joined a Commonwealth terraforming project. He used his knowledge of large-scale physics to help create new worlds instead of destroying old ones. It was, he said, the best form of redemption he could think of. Major Nari became the first commandant of the Commonwealth Peacekeepers. She trained soldiers from 24 species in the tactics that had won humanity its victory, but also in the restraint that had prevented total annihilation of the council races. Strength without mercy makes you a tyrant, she told her recruits. Mercy without strength makes you a victim. We need both. The memorial world at New Sol became a place of pilgrimage. Ships from across the Commonwealth brought visitors to see the monuments erected where the colony had stood. At the center was a wall bearing the names of all 184,000 victims. The inscription, translated into every Commonwealth language, read simply, "They crossed the line." We drew a new one. Never again? Families came to remember their dead. Students came to learn about the cost of prejudice and the price of peace. Even Valkyrie and Drenthi visitors came, some to offer apologies, others just to understand what their governments had done on the first anniversary of the massacre. A ceremony brought together representatives from every Commonwealth species. The Valkyrie patriarch himself attended, diminished but not broken. He stood before the memorial and spoke words that cost him everything his pride had left. My species believed we had earned the right to judge others, to determine who was worthy of equality. We were wrong. The humans taught us that worthiness is not measured in years or technology, but in how we treat those who cannot defend themselves. We failed that test. We murdered innocents and called it justice. I cannot undo what was done. I can only promise that my people will spend generations earning the forgiveness we do not deserve. The crowd was silent. Then, from the human section, a woman stepped forward. Her name was Rena, and she had lost her daughter at New Seoul. She walked to the patriarch and looked up at his massive frame. "My daughter was 7 years old," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "She wanted to be a pilot, to fly between the stars. Your ships took that from her. Took her future, her dreams, everything she could have been." The patriarch bowed his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I will never forgive what your species did," Rena continued. "But I accept your promise to be better. That's all we can do now. Remember the dead and build something that makes their loss mean something." She placed a flower at the memorial wall and walked away. Others followed, human and alien alike, each leaving a token of remembrance. In the years that followed, the Commonwealth grew stronger. Trade flourished between species that had once been enemies. Cultural exchanges brought understanding where there had been contempt, joint scientific projects, made discoveries that no single species could have achieved alone. The Valkyrie, stripped of their dominance, found new purpose in art and philosophy. They created some of the most moving tributes to the New Soul victims, their guilt transforming into a determination to be better. The Drenthi, their military pride humbled, became the Commonwealth's best mediators. Having experienced defeat, they understood compromise in a way they never had before. And humanity? Humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as equals. They never forgot New Soul, never let the galaxy forget it either. The Ghost Fleet remained operational, a reminder that humanity's mercy was a choice, not a weakness. Admiral Hyon retired after 5 years as Supreme Commander. He spent his remaining years writing a history of the war, making sure future generations understood both the cost of conflict and the necessity of standing firm against oppression. His final words in the book were, "We didn't want to be warriors. We wanted to be explorers, builders, dreamers. But when they forced us to fight, we fought. And when we won, we chose peace. That choice defines us more than the victory ever could." Ambassador Gina served 3 terms as Secretary General, guiding the Commonwealth through its difficult early years. She watched with satisfaction as species that had once barely tolerated each other began to build genuine friendships. At her retirement ceremony, a Valkyrie scholar presented her with an honor once reserved only for Valkyrie patriots. On the 50th anniversary of the New Seoul massacre, the Commonwealth held its largest gathering ever. Billions watched as leaders from every member species reaffirmed their commitment to the principles written in blood half a century earlier. The ceremony ended with children from 24 species reading the names of the dead, a reminder that stretched for hours but which everyone sat through in respectful silence. In the crowd, an elderly woman named Sora stood with her grandchildren. She had been Hannah's assistant, had helped build the weapons that won the war. Now she taught physics at a Commonwealth university where students of every species learned together. "Tell us about the war." "Grandmother," her grandson asked. Sor looked at the memorial wall, at the names that seemed to glow in the setting sun. The war taught us that strength alone doesn't make you right. Mercy alone doesn't make you safe. But together, strength and mercy can build something worth having. Are humans still the strongest? Her granddaughter asked. Sora smiled. We're strong. But so are the Valkyrie, the Drenthi, all the Commonwealth species. The difference is now we're strong together. And that's stronger than any empire ever was. Above them, ships from 100 worlds orbited in perfect formation, no longer divided by species or prejudice, but united by the lessons learned in humanity's darkest hour. The galaxy had crossed a line 50 years ago. Humanity had drawn a new one. And on that new line, they had built a future worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth passing to the children who played together beneath alien skies. The Galactic Council had thought they could break humanity. Instead, humanity had broken the Council and built something better from its ruins. Not through conquest, but through the simple insistence that all sapient beings deserve dignity, respect, and the right to exist without fear. That was humanity's true victory. Not the battles won or the fleets destroyed, but the proof that even in the darkness of war, even in the midst of justified rage, they could still choose to build rather than destroy, to forgive rather than exterminate, to create a future where children of every species could dream without fear. The galaxy would never forget what happened when the Council crossed the line. But more importantly, it would never forget what happened after, when humanity, given every reason to become monsters, chose to remain human.